What's the quickest way you saw a coworker get fired? In my old law office, a firm-wide email was sent out announcing the arrival of a new employee. We will call him Paul. So Paul decided to reply all to let all of us know that he was aware of our recent legal defeats, that many people should be fired for these failures, and that his hiring was the first good thing our firm had done in years. The dude was a legal assistant right out of college with no experience. A minute after the email went out, I heard a crazy shout and then watched one of the senior partners run past my office towards HR. And 5 minutes later, Paul walked past with the HR manager and a security escort. He lasted less than 45 minutes. Interviewed a guy that was replacing someone who was leaving. Offered the job and was supposed to start the next day. Just so happened that we were having a going away party for the leaving dude that night, so new guy was invited as a chance to get to know the team. New guy shows up and proceeds to get absolutely shit-faced and ask the head of HR if she wanted to go back to his place because he got a vibe during the interview process. Next day, new guy is a no-show, so we were thinking bullet dodged. He shows up just before lunch, clearly hung over making up some excuse for being late. Big boss came out and told the guy to GTFO. I was working at a place that made food items. You could have as many of these as you liked while at work, but can only take one home with you. A guy gets hired and takes advantage of this and consumes a bucket load of these items at work, which is fine, that's the deal. He then goes to leave for the day and security asks to check his bag. He hesitates and asks security if they could just check it tomorrow instead. They say no, and he says, I do have some items in there, I haven't left the site yet, can I put them in your fridge? Security relents and lets him do this. Security then checks the fridge and there's 18 items in there that weren't before. The guy is immediately terminated. Lost his job over $8 worth of products. Didn't witness it directly, but it happened to my successor. I worked at a soul-crushing software development company for 6 months. It nearly killed me. They turfed my ass because I was basically losing my fucking marbles. A week later, some guy turns up, knocks on the front door, and hands over a CV. This was in 2010, and the company was out in the middle of nowhere, so this alone was extremely weird. For lack of any other applicants, due to the company's reputation for being soul-crushing, they hired him. Day 1, he pulls out his phone in the lunchroom and starts watching porn. Not jacking it, just watching porn, like it was an entirely normal thing to do. He was unemployed 3 minutes later. This just happened. She was friends with Guy in another department and they worked together on some collaborations. From the way she told it, they had a personal falling out, and then he just ghosted her about getting back to her about work stuff. I remember us talking about it at the time and just kidding and having a bit of a laugh about how immature he was being. But it went on. Eventually, she told him what I thought was a pretty adult thing to say. She suggested they go to HR and have them mediate an agreement so they could at least work together and get things done. Later that day, she gets a call from HR that she is under investigation, but they won't say for what. The next day, she was put on leave with pay and 2 weeks later, she was fired, just like that. Then they told her it was for stalking and retribution. A guy I knew kept on turning up really late to work, but his managing supervisor tried to be lenient and understanding with him as possible since the guy was a young father. He was only age 19 and dad to a 1-year-old, and he kept on using stories such as the baby keeping him up all night or having to look after it unexpectedly as excuses for his poor attendance at work. One day his manager was at her wit's end with him after he turned up almost 2 hours late, and I saw them going back and forth with each other right there on the store floor, with the manager exasperatedly telling him, "This is your last chance, you need to turn up to work, I can't justify keeping you on if I can't depend on you for anything." Later that evening in the shift, he and I were in the smoking shelter together and, despite not knowing him well, he started to talk about how he actually just didn't care about the job. Life sucked and he thought the manager was really irritating, I didn't agree. She was actually a really nice manager in a company that didn't have many. Unbeknownst to him though, his manager had come looking for him since he had overstayed his break, and she was standing behind us the whole time, and she was so enraged when she heard everything that she sacked him right there on the spot. The guy tried to put up a fuss at first. He tried to use his baby as emotional blackmail, but the manager wasn't hearing it. My only sympathies with the guy was that the job was a pretty dead-end one, and I think he was struggling to adjust to the fact that while all his mates were going to go off and do interesting things in their lives, uni, nights out, travel, etc., he was facing a future of working at low-skill, soul-destroyingly monotonous jobs, grit and hardship. But the reality is that at the end of the day, nobody is going to employ you as a charity case, nor does anybody owe it to you to provide you with a job, and if you take the mickey too much, you'll lose what little you do have. Early in my career, I was an engineer on a refinery in the UK, and I was in charge of the QC lab. By law, we had to have external independent testing on the refinery fuel products to confirm they complied with government regulations. It seemed getting a job for the testing company was that you had to be an adult and had a driving license. The lab had a lot of very nasty chemicals either being tested or used in the testing or cleaning of the oil products. A new young girl turned up for the testing company and was dipping her finger into a chemical called phenol and stating that it makes your hand and arm go numb. Phenol is a severe muscle relaxant, including your heart, and can kill you at very low concentrations. 1 hour into her employment, we had paramedics on scene monitoring her vitals and was released after 8 hours. She didn't last the first hour of the first day, and the testing company was fined pretty heavily. I work in a strip club, so turnover is extremely high, but the owner of our club met this girl who needed a job/place to live. He set her up with a job at the club, and since we are in partnership with a certain hotel, he had her deposit comped and paid for a few nights for her in the room. 6 hours later, he gets a call that the hotel is calling the police and reporting his club as well. She goes into the hotel room, smokes it out, and then invites 5 dudes who come over and tear up the room. They were all extremely loud, so people complained, which led to the owner being contacted. The room was so smoked out it was leaking under the hotel door. Within 6 hours, she was back to having no job and being homeless once again.